With this chilling vow on their wedding night, the formidable Marquis of Thorn, Lord Nathaniel Blackwood, defined their union. For him, Seraphina Dalton was a mere transaction, her vast, new-moneyed dowry in exchange for his ancient, crumbling title. He offered her jewels, houses, and his name, but his heart remained buried with his first love. What the grieving Marquis didn't know was that his quiet, unassuming bride possessed a fiery resolve and a secret skill that would not only save his legacy from ruin, but also challenge the very ghost he worshipped. The fires in the hearth of the master chambers at Thorn Hall did little to warm the cavernous room. They licked at the ancient stones, casting long dancing shadows that made the tapestries of grim-faced ancestors seem to shift and sneer. For Seraphina Dalton, now Seraphina Blackwood, the new Marchioness of Thorn, the chill had nothing to do with the late October air, and everything to do with the man standing by the window. Lord Nathaniel Blackwood, her husband of 8 hours, was a study in marble perfection. Tall and broad-shouldered, with hair the colour of midnight, and eyes a startling glacial grey. He looked less like a man and more like a monument to sorrow. He had spoken no more than a dozen words to her throughout the entire ordeal of their wedding day. Each word was clipped precise and utterly devoid of warmth. Their union was a transaction, a grim piece of business. Her father's vast fortune, earned through the sweat and steel of the shipping trade in exchange for the prestige of his ancient crumbling title. She was the final ledger entry that balanced his family's ruinous accounts. She sat on the edge of the monstrously large canopied bed, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Her wedding gown, a confection of ivory silk and priceless lace, felt like a costume for a play in which she had forgotten all her lines. She had known this would not be a love match. Such things were the purview of penny dreadfuls and naive debutantes. She was a practical woman raised by a practical man. She understood duty. She understood contracts. She had hoped, however, for civility. Perhaps in time, even a quiet companionship. Nathaniel turned from the window, his gaze sweeping over her, as dismissive as if he were inspecting a new piece of furniture. His finely tailored evening clothes only served to emphasize his formidable presence. He moved with a predatory grace that was at odds with the profound stillness in his eyes. "I trust the day's events were not too taxing," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to absorb the room's remaining warmth. It was not a question so much as a perfunctory statement. "They were, as expected, my lord." Seraphina replied, her own voice steadier than she felt. She lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. She was a Dalton. They did not cower. A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or irritation crossed his features before being suppressed. He walked to a small mahogany table by the fire and poured himself a brandy. He did not offer her one. "Let us be clear, madam." He began swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The firelight caught in the crystal, scattering fractured rainbows on the wall. "This is a marriage of convenience. Your father has purchased my title to grant his bloodline legitimacy. I have accepted your dowry to save this estate from the consequences of my father's profligacy. It is a simple, if distasteful, arrangement." Seraphina remained silent, her posture rigid. She had known all this. Hearing it stated so bluntly, so cruelly on her wedding night was another matter entirely. He took a slow sip of his brandy, his eyes holding hers over the rim of the glass. They were cold, so cold. "You are now the Marchioness of Thorn. You will have the title, the jewels that belong to your station, the running of this house, and our London residence. You will perform your duties as hostess and lady of the manor. In return, I will expect you to be discreet, unobtrusive, and to understand the boundaries of our agreement." He placed the glass down with a soft click. "And you will understand this above all else." He crossed the remaining distance between them, stopping just before her. He was so tall she had to crane her neck to look up at him. The scent of brandy and cold night air clung to him. "You will never be my true wife." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. They were not merely a statement of fact, but a sentence, a condemnation. "My heart is not part of this transaction," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with a venomous grief that was more chilling than any shout. "It is buried, and it will not be resurrected. You are a placeholder, a necessity, nothing more." He reached into his waistcoat and pulled out a small, exquisite gold locket. He clicked it open his thumb, stroking the miniature portrait within. He did not show it to her, but she saw the way his entire demeanor softened the harsh lines of his face, dissolving into a deep, inconsolable sorrow. For a fleeting moment, she saw the man behind the Marquis, a man drowning in a past she knew nothing about. He snapped the locket shut and put it away. The mask of cold indifference slammed back into place. "Your rooms are through that adjoining door," he said, gesturing with his chin. "They are well appointed. I trust you will find them sufficient. We will maintain separate quarters. Always." With that, he turned his back on her, unbuttoning his waistcoat, as if their conversation was concluded and she was already dismissed. The finality of his action was absolute. Serafina stood, her body trembling, with a mixture of shock, humiliation, and a spark of something else, something hot and defiant. The hope for quiet companionship curdled into a bitter resolve. She would not be his meek, unobtrusive placeholder. She would not wither in the gilded cage he had constructed for her. He had laid out the terms of their contract, and they were colder and crueler than she could have imagined. But she was the daughter of Henry Dalton, a man who had built an empire from nothing. She understood contracts better than this broken nobleman ever could, and she knew that every contract had loopholes. Without another word, she turned and walked towards the adjoining door. Her back was ramrod straight, the rustle of her silk gown, the only sound in the tense silence. She would be the Marchioness of Thorn. She would perform her duties. She would run his houses. But she would do it on her own terms. He may have drawn the battle lines, but Serafina Blackwood would choose the weapons. And she would not be defeated. The days that followed bled into a monotonous grey, mirroring the perpetually overcast skies above Thorn Hall. The estate was a masterpiece of Palladian architecture, a symphony of stone and glass, set amidst sprawling manicured grounds that were slowly surrendering to the decay of autumn. Yet it felt less like a home and more like a museum, each room a silent testament to a grandeur the present could no longer afford. The staff moved like ghosts, their loyalty sworn to the Marquis, and his moods treating Serafina with a distant, chillingly correct deference. She was a curiosity, the new moneyed Marchioness, an object that did not quite fit with the decor. Her husband was a phantom. He was an empty chair at the opposite end of the impossibly long dining table, a rustle of paper from behind his closed study door, the distant thunder of hooves as he rode out at dawn. They existed in the same house, but in separate orbits, his path deliberately veering away from hers at every turn. His edict from their wedding night was not a momentary cruelty, but the rigid law of their land. Society, when it deigned to call, was no warmer. The neighbouring gentry came to inspect her, as they would a new prize, filly their smiles thin, their questions barbed. The undisputed queen of their local circle was Lady Genevieve Sterling. She was everything. Serafina was not classically beautiful, with hair the colour of spun gold, and the effortless ingrained arrogance of the truly high-born. She had known Nathaniel since childhood, a fact she took pains to mention at every opportunity. "Oh, you must find Thorn so vast," Genevieve commented during one excruciating afternoon tea, her blue eyes scanning Seraphina's simple but elegant day dress with faint amusement. Rosalind, of course, knew every nook and cranny. She used to say the house had secrets, only it would share with her. The name hung in the air, Rosalind. The ghost that haunted Thorn Hall more thoroughly than any ancestral spirit. Seraphina had learned she was the Marquis's first love, a celebrated beauty from a neighboring estate tragically killed in a riding accident 2 years prior. Rosalind was the standard against which she was measured and found wanting. Nathaniel has never been the same. Genevieve continued, a theatrical sigh escaping her perfect lips as she addressed the other ladies. He keeps her memory so perfectly. It's terribly romantic, is it not, to be loved so completely even in death? Seraphina felt the gazes of the other women upon her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was the usurper, the functional but unloved replacement. She smiled a cool, placid expression she was quickly perfecting. "It is a heavy burden for the Marquis to bear," she said, her tone neutral. "I can only endeavour to manage his household so he is not troubled by trivialities." The answer was correct, demure, and gave them nothing. Genevieve's smile tightened infinitesimally. Tired of the suffocating stillness of the drawing rooms, Seraphina began to explore. She walked the long, cold corridors, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. She discovered libraries with books whose pages were fused together from disused ballrooms draped in dusty shrouds and wings of the house that had been closed off for years. It was during one of these solitary expeditions that she found the glass houses. Tucked away behind a walled garden, they were in a sorry state. Panes of glass were cracked or missing, and the iron frames were bleeding rust. Yet inside life persisted. Neglected overgrown vines clawed their way towards the light. Hardly forgotten orchids still produced brave, waxy blooms amidst the weeds. A thick layer of dust covered potting tables and scattered notes from a botanist long gone. It felt like a secret world, a place of forgotten potential. It reminded her of her father. Before he built his shipping empire, Henry Dalton had been a merchant's son with a passion for invention and cultivation. He believed that anything with the right care and knowledge could be made to flourish. He had taught her not just to read, but to read ledgers, not just to appreciate a garden, but to understand soil composition and yields. He had given her a mind for systems, for logistics, for seeing the hidden rot beneath a pleasing facade. Her explorations soon led her to the estate office, a room adjacent to Nathaniel's study. One evening, knowing he was dining out, she slipped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather. The estate manager, a portly and complacent man named Mr. Davies, was clearly no great administrator. The books were a disaster. Accounts were months in arrears, tenant rents were uncollected, and expenditures were recorded with a shocking lack of detail. Seraphina pulled out a large leather-bound ledger. She ran her finger down a column of figures, her brow furrowing. The Thorn estate was not just struggling, it was hemorrhaging money. The income from the tenant farms was a fraction of what it should be for an estate of this size. Her dowry had not been a mere restoration. It had been a desperate plug in a sinking ship, and the ship was still taking on water. She saw reports from tenant farmers pleading for investments in new drainage or seed, all marked with Davies's dismissive scrawl, "Insufficient funds." She saw receipts for exorbitant sums spent on maintaining the racing stables, Nathaniel's only apparent passion, while the roofs of the tenant cottages were noted as being in dire need of repair. Sitting there in the dim lamplight, a plan began to form in her mind. It was a dangerous, audacious plan, one that flew in the face of her husband's demand that she be unobtrusive. He had confined her to a gilded cage, expecting her to sit quietly and preen. He saw her as a decorative object, a silent signifier of his restored wealth. He had no idea that she could see the bars were rusting and the foundations were rotten. He wanted her to be the Marchioness in name only. He had given her the run of his house. Very well. She would run it. She would run all of it. He would never know. She would work from the shadows, an unseen hand sorting out the chaos he and his incompetent manager ignored. This crumbling estate was her home, now her prison. But if she was to be a prisoner, she would be the one who commanded the guards and held the keys. She closed the ledger, a grim smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. The game had just become infinitely more interesting. Seraphina's life developed a secret duality. By day she was the placid Marchioness, overseeing menus, managing the household staff with quiet efficiency, and enduring the stilted social calls. She projected an image of serene, if somewhat detached, domesticity. But by night, she became a creature of shadows and numbers. After the great house fell silent, she would slip into the estate office, a single candle her accomplice, and pore over the ledgers and maps of the Thorn estate. Her mind, so long starved of challenge, came alive. She cross-referenced crop yields with weather reports from old almanacs. She studied new agricultural treatises she ordered discreetly from a bookseller in London. She saw patterns of neglect, opportunities missed, and a dozen small leaks that combined were draining the estate's lifeblood. Mr. Davies, the manager, was not so much corrupt as he was lazy a man clinging to the methods of his grandfather and utterly baffled by the changing world. He was a symptom of the rot, not its cause. The cause was apathy, an apathy that started at the very top with the Marquis himself. Her investigation into the estate's decay was mirrored by her growing understanding of the ghost who haunted it. Rosalind's name was a constant reverent whisper on the lips of the older staff. "Oh, Mistress Rosalind loved the winter roses," the head gardener would sigh. The master had them planted just for her. "The Marquis hasn't allowed music in the ballroom. Since Mistress Rosalind's time, the housekeeper," Mrs. Finch would say, her voice hushed. Lady Genevieve Sterling remained the primary orchestrator of this cult of memory. Nathaniel and Rosalind were soulmates, she declared during a visit, positioning herself as the foremost authority on their tragic romance. They were wild, passionate creatures. He taught her to ride that spirited stallion of hers. He blames himself, you know. He should never have let her ride out alone that day. She dabbed at a perfectly dry eye with a lace handkerchief. He keeps her rooms exactly as she left them, a perfect shrine. This revelation piqued Seraphina's curiosity. A shrine. She had been given a set of keys to the house upon her arrival. One, a small, ornate silver key, had no identified lock. On a quiet afternoon, when she knew Nathaniel was away in the county town, she began her search. She found the locked door at the end of the east wing, a part of the house she had been tacitly discouraged from exploring. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The room she entered was not dusty and shrouded like the others. It was pristine, immaculate. Sunlight filtered through heavy rose-colored curtains, illuminated a space preserved in amber. A book lay open on a chaise lounge, a silken shawl draped over its arm. A silver-backed brush sat on the dressing table, a few long blonde hairs still caught in its bristles. It was an unsettlingly perfect tableau, not a room for the living, but a carefully curated tomb. It was here, in a rosewood writing desk, that she found them a box of Rosalind's letters, tied with a black ribbon. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This felt like a deep transgression, a violation of the grief her husband clung to so fiercely. But she had to understand. She had to know the woman whose shadow she was forced to live in. She untied the ribbon and began to read. The letters were mostly from Rosalind to her cousin in London. Seraphina had expected outpourings of love for Nathaniel, poetry declarations of a soul laid bare. She found something else entirely. The penmanship was a flamboyant looping script. The words were not of love, but of acquisition. Nathaniel is utterly besotted, one letter read. He hangs on my every word. It is frankly a trifle boring, but Thorn Hall will be a fine prize. Papa says his title is one of the oldest in the country, and that is what matters. Another detailed a shopping trip to London. I have convinced dear Nathaniel that I simply cannot live without the new Parisian silks. He grumbled about the expense, the dreary man, but he relented, as he always does. He is so wonderfully pliable when one remembers to praise his horsemanship. Seraphina felt a slow, cold disillusionment wash over her. This was not the portrait of a passionate soulmate. This was the voice of a shallow, calculating materialist. There was no poetry, no mention of shared dreams, only a catalogue of dresses, jewels, and social triumphs. She wrote of Nathaniel, not as a lover, but as a conquest, a means to an end. She found the last letter dated 2 days before the riding accident. It was the most damning of all. My dearest cousin, I am bored to tears in the country. Nathaniel is in one of his dark moods, rambling on about duty and the land, as if a pile of dirt were more interesting than the coming season. Thank heavens for dear Robert's visit next week. He at least knows how to live. He has challenged me to a race to the old oak. He thinks his gelding can outpace my firefly. I shall prove him wrong and win that silly little wager of ours. Nathaniel would be furious if he knew. He thinks Firefly too spirited for me. What does he know of spirit, Robert? Lady Genevieve had never mentioned a Robert. A cold dread settled in Seraphina's stomach. The perfect tragic love story was a sham. The sainted Rosalind was a myth. Nathaniel was not mourning a real woman. He was mourning an idea, a carefully constructed fantasy that he had either co-authored or been deceived into believing. And who was the chief purveyor of this fantasy? Lady Genevieve Sterling, the keeper of the flame, the woman who spoke of Rosalind with such cloying reverence. Seraphina carefully retied the ribbon and placed the letters back in the desk. She locked the door to the shrine and walked away, the silver key feeling heavy and cold in her hand. She had stumbled upon a truth that could shatter the foundations of this house and the man who ruled it. The whispers in the walls had finally spoken to her, and they told a story of profound deception. For the first time, she felt not jealousy or inadequacy, but a flicker of pity for her cold, grieving husband. He was imprisoned not by love, but by a lie. The discovery of Rosalind's true nature did not soften Seraphina's resolve, it sharpened it to a razor's edge. Her clandestine work on the estate accounts was no longer just an act of self-preservation, but a silent rebellion against the falsehoods that suffocated Thorn Hall. While Nathaniel worshipped a phantom and bled his legacy dry, she would fight for the tangible reality, the land, the tenants, the future he was so carelessly discarding. She identified the weakest link in the chain of income, a tenant farm known as Holloway Croft, run by a family that had worked the land for generations. The current farmer, a Mr. Gideon Croft, was a good man, but beleaguered. His reports in the ledger were filled with despair. His soil was depleted from decades of planting the same wheat crop, and his requests for funds to try a new rotation system had been repeatedly denied by Mr. Davies. Holloway Croft was on the verge of failure. This would be her test. Seraphina possessed a significant dowry, a portion of which was settled upon her for her personal use. It was a sum her husband had never inquired about, assuming, she supposed, that it would be spent on gowns and fripperies. Instead, she drafted a letter to her father's solicitor in London, a man of unimpeachable discretion. She instructed him to establish a trust, managed by him, for the purpose of agricultural investment. The trust's first act would be to make a small anonymous loan to one Mr. Gideon Croft of Thorn. Her next step was to write directly to the farmer. Using a pseudonym, Mrs. H. Peregrine, and a simple unadorned stationery, she crafted a letter that was both practical and encouraging. She did not present herself as a benefactor, but as a representative of a small consortium interested in modern farming techniques. "Dear Mr. Croft," she wrote, "we have taken note of your situation and believe Holloway Croft possesses unrealized potential. We propose to offer you a modest loan at negligible interest for the sole purpose of investing in a turnip and clover rotation, as well as the purchase of better quality seed for your spring planting. Our belief is that this method will not only increase your yield, but also replenish the vitality of your soil for future seasons. Enclosed are our calculations and a draft for the initial investment. We require no security, only your commitment to the project, and detailed reports on your progress." She sent the letter via a private courier from the local town, ensuring it could not be traced back to the hall. The response a few weeks later was a letter filled with cautious, disbelieving gratitude. Mr. Croft agreed to the terms. Thus began a quiet, secret correspondence, Seraphina writing as the fictional Mrs. Peregrine advised him on drainage, on timing the planting on market prices. She drew on the knowledge gleaned from the books she'd ordered and the sharp business sense inherited from her father. She felt a thrill of purpose that was entirely new, a satisfaction far deeper than any social success could provide. She was not just the Marchioness. She was a strategist, an investor, an architect of revival. Months passed. Winter thawed into a wet, promising spring. As Seraphina had calculated, the new crops at Holloway Croft thrived. The turnip yield was robust, providing excellent winter fodder for his livestock, and the clover was fixing vital nitrogen back into the depleted soil. The first indication that her experiment had been noticed came during a tense, mostly silent breakfast with her husband. Nathaniel was frowning at a report from his estate manager. "Davies," he said more to himself than to her, "claims that Croft at Holloway is somehow having his most profitable year in a decade. Says the man is paying off his arrears, after years of petitions for aid." Strange. Seraphina's heart gave a little flutter, but she kept her expression serene as she buttered her toast. "Perhaps he's had a run of good fortune, my lord," she offered mildly. Nathaniel grunted, his grey eyes narrowed in thought. "Fortune doesn't mend fences and dig new drainage ditches. Davies says he's acting on advice from some mysterious benefactor. A London investment group, he thinks. Why would a London group be interested in one failing farm on my estate?" He tossed the report aside, the matter, an irritating puzzle rather than a source of pleasure. The success did not belong to him, therefore it was suspect. He looked at her, then a long, assessing stare she had not been subjected to since their wedding night. "You are managing the household accounts well," he stated as if delivering a verdict. "Mrs. Finch informs me you have cut expenses by nearly 20% without any discernible loss of quality." "I am pleased the results are satisfactory," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. He held her gaze for a moment longer, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, before he stood, tossed his napkin on the table and left the room without another word. It was not praise, not by any means. It was a grudging acknowledgement of competence, and from him it felt like a monumental victory. Her unseen hand was beginning to work its magic. She was restoring his estate one ledger entry, one revitalized field at a time. He lived in a house whose slow, secret mending was being orchestrated by the woman he had dismissed as a mere placeholder. The irony was a private, delicious satisfaction. She was proving him wrong, not with words or confrontation, but with quiet, irrefutable results. She was becoming indispensable whether he knew it or not. The summer was hot and dry, leaving the fields of the Thorn estate parched and dusty. The wheat, the primary cash crop and the source of most of the tenants' livelihoods, grew tall but brittle. A nervous energy settled over the land as harvest approached. It was then that the first signs of trouble appeared, a strange rust-colored powder on the leaves and stalks of the wheat near the river meadows. Mr. Davies dismissed it as common mildew. "A bit of dry weather will see it off," he declared with his usual blustering incompetence. But Seraphina, who had been studying the latest agricultural journals, felt a chill of dread. The description matched a virulent strain of fungal blight that had ravaged farms in the south 2 years prior. It spread rapidly in humid conditions and could wipe out an entire harvest in a matter of weeks. And now, after the long drought, the forecast predicted a week of heavy, humid thunderstorms. She tried to raise the alarm. "Mr. Davies," she began approaching him in the estate office. "I have been reading about a blight with a similar appearance. Perhaps we should consider harvesting the unaffected fields early to create a fire break of sorts." Davies looked at her, as if she had sprouted a second head. "Harvesting early, Marchioness, with all due respect, these are matters of husbandry, not for ladies to concern themselves with. The wheat is not yet ripe. We will wait as we always do." His tone was patronizing, dismissive. She was the lady of the house, and her domain was floral arrangements, not crop rotation. Frustrated, she tried to approach her husband. She found him in the stables, running a hand down the flank of a magnificent black stallion. The air was rich with the scent of hay and horseflesh. "My lord," she began, her voice tight with urgency. "I have reason to believe the wheat is in danger. There is a blight in the river meadows, and I fear it will spread with the coming rain." Nathaniel turned to her, his expression one of weary annoyance. He had just returned from a trip to London, and his mood was foul. "Davies is the manager. He has handled the harvest for 30 years. I trust he knows what he is doing." "But he is mistaken," she insisted, stepping forward. "If we do not act now, we could lose everything." The tenants are my concern, madam, not yours." He cut her off, his voice like the crack of a whip. "Confine your activities to the house where they belong." The dismissal was absolute. Humiliated and furious, Seraphina retreated. The storm clouds gathered both in the sky and in her heart. He would not listen. Davies would not act. They were all bound to a course of tradition and pride that would lead them directly to ruin. The rains came that night, thick and suffocating. For 3 days the skies opened. When the weather finally broke, the scale of the disaster was revealed. The blight, nourished by the moisture, had exploded. It raced through the wheat fields, turning the golden stalks a sickly, dying brown. A wave of despair rolled through the tenant community. This was not just a lost profit. For many, it was the threat of starvation of being turned off their land. Mr. Davies was paralyzed by the catastrophe he had failed to prevent. He wrung his hands and muttered about providence and bad luck. The tenants, seeing their year's work dissolving into dust before their eyes, grew restive and angry. This was the moment Seraphina knew she could not remain a hidden hand. She had to act openly and decisively. She remembered an article in one of the journals about a radical treatment for the blight, a solution of lime and sulfur sprayed directly onto the plants. It was expensive and labor-intensive, and it might not save the already infected crops, but it could potentially halt the spread and save the fields on the higher ground. She took a significant sum from her own accounts and sent a rider to the county town with an urgent order for sulfur and lime from the apothecary. Then she walked from the hall down to the tenants' village. They gathered at the sight of her, their faces etched with fear and resentment. They saw her as part of the system that had failed them. "My husband and Mr. Davies are deliberating," she began, her clear voice cutting through the murmurs. But the blight will not wait for deliberation. She stood before them, not as a remote marchioness in silk, but as a woman with a plan. Her dress was practical, her sleeves already rolled up. "I have read of a treatment. It is a chance, not a guarantee. But it is better than watching our harvest perish. I have purchased the supplies. What I need now is you. We will work together, and we will fight this." Her conviction, her refusal to be cowed, had an effect. Gideon Croft, the farmer from Holloway, was the first to step forward. "I'll follow you, my lady," he said, his voice rough but firm. "The old ways have failed us. It's time for a new one." His trust earned through their secret correspondence swayed the others. For the next 2 days, Serafina worked alongside them. She organized the mixing of the solution, the distribution of the sprayers. She walked the muddy fields. Her fine boots ruined her face, smudged with grime and sweat. She listened to their concerns, offered words of encouragement, and earned their respect, not with her title but with her toil. Nathaniel returned from a ride on the far side of the estate to find this scene of unprecedented activity. He saw his wife, the woman he had ordered to remain in the house, standing on a wagon, directing the efforts like a general commanding an army. He saw the tenants working with a feverish purpose he had not witnessed in years. They were not resentful. They were motivated, and they were looking to her for leadership. He rode his stallion through the crowd which parted before him. He pulled up before the wagon, his face a thunderous mask of disbelief and fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice ringing out across the fields. "I gave you an order." Serafina looked down at him. From her perch on the wagon, she was for the first time his equal in height. She was no longer the timid bride or the silent marchioness. She was covered in dirt, her hair escaping its pins, but she had never felt more powerful. "Your order would have cost these people their livelihoods," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every person in the field. "Your manager is incompetent, and your pride is more important to you than your duty. So I am doing your duty for you." The silence that followed was absolute. No one had ever spoken to the Marquis of Thorn like that. The tenants watched, holding their breath. Nathaniel stared at her, his grey eyes blazing. He was speechless. He saw not the merchant's daughter he had married for her dowry, but a stranger, a fierce, intelligent, and capable woman who had, in the face of his failure, single-handedly rallied his people and taken command of his land. The ice that had encased his heart for 2 long years didn't melt, but for the first time he felt a profound and undeniable crack. The raw public defiance from his wife should have enraged Nathaniel. A part of him, the part conditioned by pride and aristocracy, was indeed furious. But a larger, more honest part was stunned into a state of grudging admiration. Serafina's bold declaration had not been an act of shrewish rebellion. It had been a statement of undeniable fact. He had failed. His manager had failed. And she, the woman he had relegated to the shadows of his life, had stepped into the light and taken control. The lime and sulfur treatment worked. It was not a miracle a significant portion of the harvest was lost, but it halted the blight's relentless march. The fields on the higher ground were saved, and with them the tenants were saved from utter ruin. Seraphina became a reluctant hero among them. They tipped their hats with a new, genuine respect. They called her our Marchioness. The incident forced Nathaniel to look at his estate and his life with newly opened eyes. The veil of apathy he had lived behind since Rosalind's death was torn away. He summoned a terrified Mr. Davies to his study, and for 3 hours interrogated him about the estate's finances. The manager's bumbling incompetence became glaringly obvious. When Nathaniel demanded to know how Holloway Croft had reversed its fortunes, Davies could only stammer about a mysterious London benefactor. Driven by a new, unfamiliar curiosity about his wife, Nathaniel launched his own investigation. It was shockingly easy. He rode to Holloway Croft himself and spoke to Gideon Croft. The farmer, fiercely loyal to the Mrs. Peregrine, who had saved him, was initially reticent. But the Marquis could be formidable when he chose. Faced with direct questions, Croft eventually admitted the truth, showing Nathaniel the letters, the practical advice, the shrewd calculations, the encouraging words, all in a distinctive, elegant hand that Nathaniel recognized instantly from the household ledgers his wife kept. He sat in his study that night, the farmer's copies of the letters spread across his desk, and felt the ground shift beneath him. Seraphina had used her own money and a sharp, incisive intelligence he never knew she possessed to save a part of his estate. She had done it silently, secretly asking for no credit. She had then saved the rest of it, publicly, risking his wrath to do what was right. The woman he had married was not the one he thought he knew. She was a stranger of immense depth and capability. While Nathaniel was uncovering his wife's secrets, Seraphina was driven to unravel the great lie of his life. Emboldened by her success in the fields, she sought out the one person she felt might tell her the unvarnished truth about Rosalind. Mrs. Gable, Rosalind's former lady's maid, was now retired, and living in a small cottage on the edge of the estate, paid a generous pension to ensure her silence. Seraphina visited her on the pretense of delivering a basket of goods from the hall. The old woman was frail, with sharp, knowing eyes. After a bit of polite conversation, Seraphina asked her question directly. "Mrs. Gable, I need you to tell me about Rosalind. The real Rosalind." The old woman's lips thinned. "It's not my place, my lady. The Marquis is living in a prison of his own grief," Seraphina said softly. "But I do not believe he is grieving for a real person. I believe he is grieving a story, and I believe Lady Genevieve Sterling is its author." At the mention of Genevieve, Mrs. Gable's facade cracked. A lifetime of resentment flickered in her eyes. "Lady Genevieve." She spat the name like a curse. She was always jealous. Rosalind was prettier, you see, but Lady Genevieve was cleverer. She knew how to manage people. And then the story poured out. Rosalind was beautiful, yes, but also vain, selfish, and profoundly reckless. She had found Nathaniel's brooding devotion tiresome. Her affair with her cousin Robert had been a poorly kept secret among the staff. She called the Marquis her sombre saint. Mrs. Gable recounted her voice, dripping with disdain, and laughed about it with Mr. Robert. The riding accident was not a tragic mishap. It was the result of a foolish, reckless race between Rosalind and her lover, just as her letter had suggested. They had both been drinking. Robert had been thrown but was uninjured. Rosalind, taking a dangerous jump, had been killed instantly. Lady Genevieve was the first one on the scene after Mr. Robert fled like a coward. Mrs. Gable finished her voice a low whisper. She's the one who told the Marquis that Rosalind had ridden out to gather wildflowers for him. She's the one who built the story of the tragic accident, of the perfect love cut short. She fed his grief, nurtured it. She knew if he stayed devoted to a ghost, he would never look at another living woman. She was just waiting. The ugly, simple truth settled over Serafina, cold and heavy. Genevieve's cruelty was not casual. It was a calculated long-term campaign to keep Nathaniel emotionally crippled and available. The confrontation came at the annual harvest ball, the first to be held since Rosalind's death, an event Serafina had insisted upon to restore morale. The great ballroom was filled with light and music for the first time in years. Serafina, in a gown of deep emerald green, stood beside her husband, a portrait of composure. Genevieve Sterling approached them, her smile like polished glass. "How brave of you, Serafina, to host a ball here," she said, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. This room held so many happy memories for Nathaniel and his darling Rosalind. I'm sure it must be painful for him. Before Serafina could respond, Nathaniel spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "On the contrary, Genevieve, it is time this house was filled with life again." He looked at Serafina, a flicker of something new, respect, partnership in his eyes. It was a small gesture, but it was a public alignment. He was standing with her. Genevieve's smile faltered. Seeing she was losing her hold, she turned her venom on Serafina. "You may have bought your way into this house, but you will never replace her. You have no idea what true passion is." That was the final straw. Serafina met Genevieve's malicious gaze. "Don't I?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. "Does true passion involve laughing at a man's devotion behind his back? Does it involve conducting an affair with your cousin Robert?" The name dropped into the conversation like a stone. Genevieve went pale. The small crowd around them fell silent. "Does it involve a drunken race on a dangerous horse?" Serafina pressed on, relentless. "Is that the grand, tragic love you have been curating for everyone's benefit?" I don't know what you're talking about," Genevieve stammered, her composure shattering. "Oh, I think you do," Serafina said. "You were the first on the scene, weren't you? You invented a beautiful lie about wildflowers to cover a squalid, ugly truth. You have kept a good man chained to a ghost for 2 years, all for your own selfish benefit." Nathaniel stood frozen, the color draining from his face. Every word Serafina spoke landed like a hammer blow, dismantling the shrine he had built in his heart. He looked from his wife's blazing, righteous anger to Genevieve's crumbling facade of lies, and saw the devastating truth. His grief, his all-consuming sorrow, was not a noble tribute. It was a cage, and Genevieve had held the key. He had been a fool. "Get out," he said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble directed at Genevieve. "Get out of my house, and never return." Lady Genevieve Sterling, exposed and humiliated, turned and fled the ballroom, the whispers of the scandalized guests following her like a plague. Nathaniel was left standing in the center of the room, the world he had known for 2 years utterly destroyed. He turned and looked at his wife, the woman who had saved his lands, defended his name, and now had just handed him a terrible, liberating truth. The aftermath of the harvest ball was a profound and unnerving silence. The great lie had been torn down, leaving a gaping void. For days, Nathaniel was a ghost in his own home, moving through the rooms, as if he no longer recognized them. The sainted memory of Rosalind had been the organizing principle of his life, his grief a defining characteristic. Without it, he was adrift. He looked at the portrait of Rosalind that hung in the gallery, and saw not a lost love, but a calculating stranger. He looked at his own reflection and saw a man who had been willfully blind, a willing prisoner, in a jail of his own making. He avoided Seraphina. He did not know what to say to her. Apology felt laughably inadequate. Gratitude felt hollow. She had not only saved his fortune, she had sledgehammered the walls of his emotional prison, and he was blinking in the harsh, unfamiliar light of truth, unsure what to do with his freedom. Seraphina, in turn, gave him space. She knew this was a wound he had to tend to himself. She continued her work meeting with Gideon Croft to plan the next season, reviewing the household accounts, bringing quiet order to the chaos he had for so long ignored. She did not press him or demand his attention. She simply continued to be the competent, steadying force she had become. Her silence was not one of submission, but of strength. She had done what was necessary, and now the next move was his. He finally came to find her a week later. She was in the glass houses, a place that had become her sanctuary. She was tending to a struggling orchid, her brow furrowed in concentration. She did not seem surprised to see him. He stood for a long moment, simply watching her. He saw the way she gently touched a leaf, the focused intelligence in her eyes. He had married her for her dowry, for the blunt, uncomplicated power of her father's money. He had been a fool. Her true value was not in her fortune, but in her character, her resilience, her astonishing quiet strength. "Seraphina," he began, his voice raspy. She looked up, her expression calm, waiting. He walked closer, stopping before the potting table. He gestured vaguely at the ledgers and agricultural journals she had stacked in a corner. "Holloway Croft, the blight. You did all of that." "It wasn't a question." "I did what was necessary," she replied simply. "You used your own money. You worked with your hands. You risked public humiliation, and my wrath," he continued, his voice low, "and at the ball, you fought for me, even when I had given you no reason to. Why?" Seraphina set down her trowel and met his searching gaze. "Because Thorn Hall is my home now. Its people are my people. And because I could not stand by and watch a good man be destroyed by a lie, even if that man held me in contempt." Her honesty was as clean and sharp as a shard of glass. He felt it pierce through the last of his pride. He had treated her as a commodity, an inconvenience. She had treated him as a man worthy of saving. "I have been a fool," he said, the words costing him everything, and yet feeling utterly liberating. "Worse than a fool. I have been cruel to you. I hid behind a fabricated grief because it was easier than living. I took your dowry and gave you nothing but a cold house and a bitter husband. I am sorry, Seraphina, for everything." It was more than she had ever expected to hear from him. She saw in his eyes not the cold Marquis of Thorn, but a man humbled, broken, and willing to be remade. He reached out and picked up one of the estate ledgers she had been working on. He opened it, his fingers tracing the neat columns of her handwriting. "You understand all of this better than I do," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "Better than Davies ever did." He closed the book and held it out to her. "I am dismissing Davies. I want you to run this estate with me, as my partner." This was the true apology. Not the words, but the offer. It was a gesture of ultimate respect, an acknowledgement of her worth that went beyond her title, beyond her dowry. It was an offer of an equal footing. "I would like that," she said, a small, genuine smile finally reaching her lips. A few days later, he took her to the small, formal garden where a marble statue of Rosalind stood. It was overgrown and melancholy. "I am having this torn out," he said, his voice firm. "Her memory has cast a long enough shadow over this house." He turned to Seraphina, a new light in his glacial grey eyes, a warmth she had never seen before. I thought perhaps we could build a new, larger glass house here, for your orchids, for your work. He was choosing her. He was choosing the living, breathing reality of the woman beside him over the dead ghost of his past. He was choosing the future over the lie. That evening, as they sat together in the study, a room she had never before been invited into, working side by side on the estate plans, a comfortable silence settled between them. The house no longer felt cold and vast, but filled with a quiet sense of purpose. He reached across the desk and took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "On our wedding night," he said softly, his eyes holding hers, "I told you that you would never be my true wife." He shook his head, a look of deep regret on his face. "I was wrong. You are more of a wife to me, more of a partner to this house and this family than I ever could have imagined. You are my true wife, Serafina, in every way that matters." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. It was not a gesture of wild passion, but something far more profound, a promise of respect, of partnership, and of a love that was not born in a flash of lightning, but one that had been quietly, diligently, and courageously earned. And so the cold Marquis, who vowed to never give his heart, found it stolen by the woman he tried so desperately to push away. Serafina Dalton, the bride he took for duty, became Serafina Blackwood, the partner he could not live without. Theirs was not a story of love at first sight, but of love earned through trial, truth, and the quiet courage of a woman who refused to be a ghost in her own home. She didn't just change him, she resurrected him. What did you think of Serafina's journey? Did Nathaniel deserve his second chance? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of love against all odds, please give this video a like, share it with a fellow romance lover, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of history, drama, and passion that feel like they could have been real.